Well, thank you for joining us tonight for this important presentation. I'm Kathleen Mason, a core team leader with Indivisible Rise Newburyport, and we're sponsoring this event along with Greater Haverhill Indivisible, Greater Andover Indivisible, the Women in Action Huddle, and the Democratic Town and City Committees of Newburyport, Newbury, and West Newbury. So thank you to all these sponsors. It's important to get this information we're going to hear tonight out to as many people as possible. So it's wonderful we have a good group here. I want to say welcome to Christine Green. She will be our presenter this evening. We really appreciate her coming to talk to us about nonviolent resistance, what it means, and how we can use it. And first, for a little background on Christine, she's a trained professional life coach and is certified in conflict mediation. Christine has been an activist for social justice in previous lives and in this one. Her current day job is that of a web designer and marketing consultant. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Christine.
Thank you, Kath, and welcome everybody. So this may be a little disjointed because I've changed the presentation about 6 times in the last few weeks because of how things are unfolding in the world. It was originally going to just focus on nonviolence and peacekeeping for protests, but now it's going to include some other stuff and about what we can do and how we prevent a stolen election. So I'm just going to get started. I think it's probably best to put questions in the chat, and we'll probably answer most of them at the end because I think the dots will get connected as I go. The other thing to know is that there's a lot of support material on my new website, and I'll be giving a quick tour of that website if I figure out how to do that with my screens. Yeah. So it's basically a crash course in nonviolent resistance. And the big question is, can we save our country from authoritarianism? A few weeks ago, maybe all of you weren't asking that question. I've been asking that question for quite a while, and actually have been following experts on authoritarianism and experts on election security. So I've been starting to panic about this. And in the middle of August, I started like a desperate search online to find what organizations were offering information and instructions about resistance of an authoritarian takeover. And I couldn't find it. And I was also looking for something that had a lot of resources for nonviolence. So I created one. And this is my site, and we'll be taking a little tour in a little while. But this is where you're going to find tons of information, and everything that I touch on tonight, you'll be able to go to the website to find all the details. This is the actual website, and it's activistforlife.com. And actually, if any of the technical people want to drop that into the chat, that might be helpful, but I'm going to ask people not to click on it yet. And when you type it in, be sure you type in www first, because for some reason it won't load if you don't do that, and then Activist for Life. But we'll have availability to the link. So this is basically the home page. I'm just going to sort of go through this pretty quickly because you can come back later and see whatever you need. This is the home page. There's a lot of information. There's a great article of 10 things you need to know to stop a coup. Preparation for election day nightmare. I've got a lot of quick links here. Let's go, like if people want to get active, if they aren't active yet, we'll click on that. There's a whole page on that with Alice Paul giving you the side eye. I have links to different organizations, and best of all, if you have friends who don't know what the heck to do, send them here and they can make a donation. They can, we got Force Multiplier, Black Voters Matter, Swing Left, and then some other, this is actually outdated, I have to update that. So there's a lot of different stuff here. I have a whole page about voting, everything you can possibly want to know about voting. So if you have friends who are still making their voting plan, send them to this page, which is up here at the top. That's where you get to it. All the different good sites, how to become a poll worker, early voting, how to vote by mail, a lot of instructions, creating a voting plan, you name it. So that's all that. The reading page is a really good place to start to get oriented about what's going on. And there's some great articles by George Lakey. And here he is here, and that's me with him. He has been a nonviolent activist for 50 years. He's 82 years old. He was a trainer for the Mississippi Freedom Summer in 1964. So this guy knows his stuff, and he co-wrote the manual for the civil rights movement. So he writes articles for a site called Waging Nonviolence, and I featured a bunch of them here, and they're great. He wrote this one here in end of July, then August, and then this one was also in August. But they're great ways to get you oriented to what's going on, and some insights he has about how to avoid a coup and what we can learn. There's some other stuff here, some other articles. These great video, Timothy Snyder, who's written on tyranny and stuff. Gaslit Nation, 2 women who are authoritarian experts. You name it. Let's see what else. Okay, let's go right over to the nonviolence page and de-escalation. And I explain a lot there about nonviolence. I'm going to show you this video in a little while. There's about nonviolent discipline. Probably recognize this guy, John Lewis. We'll talk about him. Here's some stuff about peacekeeping. I'll be talking a little bit about that. A brief de-escalation training. A little more history. Everybody thinks of Gandhi and they think of John Lewis and Martin Luther King, but 100 years ago, women who were fighting for the vote were using nonviolent direct action then, but nobody talks about that. But that's a great article. Here's one of the main resources. Let me go over to I'm going to click this. It'll take it to the training resources page. One of the first things I want you to download later is Nonviolence and De-escalation Handbook. I've done all the work for you because I know everybody is busy. They don't have time. So it's a great place to start to understand about nonviolence, why it's important, how we can use it for protesting and for other actions. I also have a one-page handout that organizations can use. That's something to give to your participants, or you can change it. You can use it as a reference and change it. So that's on the free download page. So that's probably all you need to know for now, because there's plenty you can look at later on. Okay, nonviolence is not simply not being physically violent. It doesn't tend to come naturally for most of us, even if we think it does. Everyday aggression may seem minor, but in my eyes, it's actually a big deal. I'm going to talk a little bit about this, though there's a lot more information in my handbook. Aggressive behavior, whether it's verbal, nonverbal, or physical, is the seed of violence. If we're committed to nonviolence, then we must be committed to always moving in the direction of calming tensions and maintaining self-control. That's the part of de-escalation. As I said, the technique for this is nonviolent practices and de-escalation. Almost everyone I know would insist that they were a peaceful person. And yet I have observed those same people at times being aggressive. And that includes me. So I am part of the reason I've gotten obsessed with this work is just trying to work on my own stuff So to really be nonviolent, it requires a level of self-awareness, being honest with ourselves about when we're aggressive and how we can change that, get in touch with our triggers and stuff, and some type of training. So whether it's being here tonight or reading the handbook or watching videos and stuff like that. And then commitment and discipline. And I'll get more into that later when we talk about nonviolent direct action that are ongoing campaigns that require a lot of discipline. I wrote the handbook for you, so later on you can go back and download that. So I want to talk a little more about aggression and give the definition of it. To me, it's behaving with hostility, usually as an inappropriate expression of anger. I mean, there's nothing wrong with anger. A lot of people do think that they shouldn't be angry, or it's not a good thing if they're a peaceful person or if they're a spiritual person, but anger is simply an emotion, and it's really how we express it. We can express it inappropriately by being hostile and aggressive or even violent, or we can channel it into action, like doing phone banking and texting and working for candidates and all that good stuff. So is this degree of nitty-gritty detail of nonviolence and overreaction? Well, I want to give you an analogy, because there probably are some of you here or other people you know who would think that maybe I'm getting a little anal about this, but let me ask you this. Are the nitty-gritty details of racial microaggressions and overreaction? And probably most of us here are white, and we're all becoming aware of things that we weren't aware of before. Microaggressions, little things that we never knew were racist because our other white friends wouldn't tell us, and our Black friends certainly wouldn't tell us. To me, that's a great analogy. I think they're really similar. I'm a peaceful person, of course I'm nonviolent. I'm a woke white person, of course I'm not racist. And yet we all know that we can be racist at times when we don't even know it. So here's a poll. How many of you are having negative thoughts and feelings of an extreme nature that you did not experience before 2016? If you're like me, you're finding yourself having emotions and intensity of feelings that you never had before. I mean, I can't believe the thoughts and feelings that have come up for me. And this is why I feel like this is more important than ever, that we follow the example of John Lewis and practice nonviolent discipline. So if I can get back to my screen, I'm going to show you this video. This is actually a video from 2015, but it's a wonderful introduction to nonviolent resistance around the world and just in general. I've watched this video about 15 times, and every time I do, I see something new.
War has been a part of my life since I can remember. I was born in Afghanistan, just 6 months after the Soviets invaded. And even though I was too young to understand what was happening, I had a deep sense of the suffering and the fear around me. Those early experiences had a major impact on how I now think about war and conflict. I learned that when people have a fundamental issue at stake, for most of them, giving in is not an option. For these types of conflicts, when people's rights are violated, when their countries are occupied, when they're oppressed and humiliated, they need a powerful way to resist and to fight back. Which means that no matter how destructive and terrible violence is, if people see it as their only choice, they will use it. Most of us are concerned with the level of violence in the world. But we're not going to end war by telling people that violence is morally wrong. Instead, we must offer them a tool that's at least as powerful and as effective as violence. This is the work I do. For the past 13 years, I've been teaching people in some of the most difficult situations around the world how they can use nonviolent struggle to conduct conflict. Most people associate this type of action with Gandhi and Martin Luther King. But people have been using nonviolent action for thousands of years. In fact, most of the rights that we have today in this country, as women, as minorities, as workers, as people of different sexual orientations, and citizens concerned with the environment, these rights weren't handed to us. They were won by people who fought for them and who sacrificed for them. But because we haven't learned from this history, nonviolent struggle as a technique is widely misunderstood. I met recently with a group of Ethiopian activists, and they told me something that I hear a lot. They said they'd already tried nonviolent action and it hadn't worked. Years ago, they held a protest. The government arrested everyone, and that was the end of that. The idea that nonviolent struggle is equivalent to street protests is a real problem. Because although protests can be a great way to show that people want change, on their own, they don't actually create change, at least change that is fundamental. Powerful opponents are not going to give people what they want just because they ask nicely, or even not so nicely. Nonviolent struggle works by destroying an opponent, not physically, but by identifying the institutions that an opponent needs to survive and then denying them those sources of power. Nonviolent activists can neutralize the military by causing soldiers to defect. They can disrupt the economy through strikes and boycotts. And they can challenge government propaganda by creating alternative media. There are a variety of methods that can be used to do this. My colleague and mentor, Jean Sharp, has identified 198 methods of nonviolent action. And protest is only one. Let me give you a recent example. Until a few months ago, Guatemala was ruled by corrupt former military officials with ties to organized crime. People were generally aware of this, but most of them felt powerless to do anything about it. Until one group of citizens, just 12 regular people, put out a call on Facebook to their friends to meet in the Central Plaza holding signs with a message, "Renuncia ya," resign already. To their surprise, 30,000 people showed up. They stayed there for months as protests spread throughout the country. At one point, organizers delivered hundreds of eggs to various government buildings with a message. If you don't have the huevos, the balls, to stop corrupt candidates from running for office, you can borrow ours. President Molina responded by vowing that he would never step down. And the activists realized that they couldn't just keep protesting and ask the president to resign. They needed to leave him no choice. So they organized a general strike in which people throughout the country refused to work. In Guatemala City alone, over 400 businesses and schools shut their doors. Meanwhile, farmers throughout the country blocked major roads. Within 5 days, the president, along with dozens of other government officials, resigned already. I've been greatly inspired by the creativity and bravery of people using nonviolent action in nearly every country in the world. For example, recently, a group of activists in Uganda released a crate of pigs in the streets. You can see here that the police are confused about what to do with them. The pigs were painted the color of the ruling party. One pig was even wearing a hat that people recognized. Activists around the world are getting better at grabbing headlines, but these isolated actions do very little if they're not part of a larger strategy. A general wouldn't march his troops into battle unless he had a plan to win the war. Yet this is how most of the world's nonviolent movements operate. Nonviolent struggle is just as complex as military warfare, if not more. Its participants must be well-trained and have clear objectives, and its leaders must have a strategy of how to achieve those objectives. The technique of war has been developed over thousands of years with massive resources and some of our best minds dedicated to understanding and improving how it works. Meanwhile, nonviolent struggle is rarely systematically studied, and even though the number is growing, there are still only a few dozen people in the world who are teaching it. This is dangerous because we now know that our old approaches of dealing with conflict are not adequate for the new challenges that we're facing. The US government recently admitted that it's in a stalemate in its war against ISIS. But what most people don't know is that people have stood up to ISIS using nonviolent action. When ISIS captured Mosul in June 2014, they announced that they were putting in place a new public school curriculum based on their own extremist ideology. But on the first day of school, not a single child showed up. Parents simply refused to send them. And they told journalists they would rather homeschool their children than to have them brainwashed. This is an example of just one act of defiance in just one city. But what if it was coordinated with the dozens of other acts of nonviolent resistance that have taken place against ISIS? What if the parents' boycott was part of a larger strategy to identify and cut off the resources that ISIS needs to function? The skilled labor needed to produce food. The engineers needed to extract and refine oil. The media infrastructure and communications networks and transportation systems, and the local businesses that ISIS relies on. It may be difficult to imagine defeating ISIS with action that is nonviolent, but it's time that we challenge the way we think about conflict and the choices we have in facing it. Here's an idea worth spreading. Let's learn more about where nonviolent action has worked and how we can make it more powerful, just like we do with other systems and technologies that are constantly being refined to better meet human needs. It may be that we can improve nonviolent action to a point where it is increasingly used in place of war. Violence as a tool of conflict could then be abandoned in the same way that bows and arrows were, because we have replaced them with weapons that are more effective. With human innovation, we can make nonviolent struggle more powerful than the newest and latest technologies of war. The greatest hope for humanity lies not in condemning violence, but in making violence obsolete. Thank you.
So I want to take a quick look at some guidelines for peaceful protests. This is actually part of the handout that I have on my website. And I think it's the best way to sort of give you a sense of what we can be asking of participants. So I'm just going to zip through these real quickly. I will be respectful to those who are part of our rally and those who oppose us. I will not be verbally aggressive, physically aggressive, or violent toward anyone. I will not respond when baited by aggressive counter-protesters. This is part of the discipline. We basically don't want to engage with the hecklers and the counter-protesters. I will follow de-escalation principles and always attempt to calm a situation. I will stay focused on our own message and not chant aggressively at counter-protesters. I won't block walkways, crossways, etc. I won't physically block counter-protesters. I won't intentionally damage any property, will not be under the influence or carry alcohol or non-prescribed drugs, no weapons. I will not endanger other participants, bystanders, or counter-protesters. And most of all, my behavior reflects on the group, and therefore I agree to these guidelines. So one of the reasons I wanted to do this, I've actually been thinking about this nonviolence for over 4 years. When the first Women's March happened, I was a little nervous that there might be counter-protesters that showed up. There might be some type of opposition. And I had a feeling that a lot of people going, particularly the younger people, probably didn't have experience. They weren't around in the 60s and 70s when we had these big marches and when we had some training and we had marshals and peacekeepers at the marches. And I was concerned that there would be people who would not know how to deal with that. And again, particularly young people, because young people today are so wonderfully confident the way we weren't, and they feel empowered. But what goes along with that is that nobody messes with us, and they will speak up about anything and everything. And my concern is that that could get them in trouble. Now, we live in a mostly white area here, and we have pretty decent police officers. So we haven't had to talk about violence or deal with it, but things are changing, and I think we're going to be up against more opposition. I think we need to prepare for that. And part of what Indivisible Newburyport did, I think it was for the impeachment rally. That's our lovely friend Karen there with her peacekeeper vest. We got together making signs, but we also got a bunch of vests. We designated folks as peacekeepers. And the wonderful thing about doing this and putting the large sign on someone's back is that it not only identifies a peacekeeper, so if you need someone or something's happening, but it's also a branding issue. It sets the tone for the protest. So anyone arriving who maybe was looking for a little trouble, even someone on our side, they see the peacekeeper vests and it sort of sends a message. It also sends a message to the police officers that we're all about keeping peace. So I think it's a wonderful thing to do for a lot of reasons. And coming soon, I'm working on a peacekeepers guide, which is a guideline that will help orient peacekeepers so that it'll be possible to have people who haven't really been trained, but they can read through a guidebook and get a sense of their responsibilities to at least have some kind of orientation. So basically, I'm not going to get a lot into de-escalation, and that's really the role of the peacekeepers mostly at a protest, particularly if they're wanting to de-escalate a counter protest or something. It's usually a peacekeeper who would go and approach them with their de-escalation skills and work with them. I want to now shift gears and get specific about nonviolent direct action, what Jamala was just talking about in the video. So you got sort of an introduction to that. It's a form of nonviolent resistance. She referred to it as nonviolent struggle, but it's really an entire strategic campaign. Mostly what we've been doing in this area has been one-off protests. Impeachment, let's all go to the square, hold our signs, do some chanting. But what we're coming up against potentially, unless there's a miracle, is the kind of situation that is going to require strategic planning, ongoing actions, and the most effective way to do this will be with strategically planned campaigns for resistance. There's a lot of definitions of nonviolent direct action. I tried to make one that was as simple as possible. So nonviolent direct action is when regular people use creative tactics that are physically and verbally nonviolent to pressure power holders to commit a specific outcome. Outcomes sought are almost always for change that protects or improves lives, creates equality, and moves towards justice. So specifically around what's going on right now, there are like two phases. There's stuff we can do from now until election day. And I have some things on my website that will help with that. And then there's from election day until inauguration day, assuming that all hell may break loose or whatever. We have no idea what's going to happen. But I'm not feeling real optimistic about it. The main thing I want to stress here is that we need to shift gears. We're used to working on social change activism, and that's the protests, that's things like climate change, and that's things like Black Lives Matter and other stuff. But we're going to need to shift gears away from that to defense activism. And that means putting those social change movements on hold. Now, some people might not be happy to hear that, but the reason is if we don't shift 100% to defense activism to save our democracy and prevent an authoritarian takeover, Black lives may not matter at all. No lives may matter. We may be really in trouble. We won't even have the privilege or option of working on climate change. So while some people may resist this idea, it's a necessary shift, and it's a little tricky to make that shift. And that's one of the reasons I want to encourage you to go to the website and read some of the articles by George Lakey, because he explains that, and he explains it in detail. It's like 2 or 3 articles. They're really good, and you'll get what I'm talking about. So the first campaign going on now, there's a couple different names, but I created a simplified version that you can download, and I'm calling it the Count All Ballots Direct Action. There's another group called Hold the Line, and they've put together a handbook that's also on my website. But this is a step-by-step guide that's about persuading local officials, the media, and law enforcement to agree to not accept election results until all ballots are counted. And again, you can go and download that. It's actually on a lot of pages. There's a lot of sections for that, so you won't have any trouble finding it. And as I said, so we will go to, I've created a pledge, and you'll find that on the website too, that we can actually approach specific elected officials and ask them to pledge to this. I actually did this verbally with the mayor of Amesbury a couple of weeks ago. She does a weekly live broadcast on Facebook where she accepts questions, and I asked her if she would commit to that, and she said, of course. And I will probably send her something to try to get her to sign the pledge. And what I've done is I've created an online, it's basically a petition, but it's a real easy way that people can sign it or not sign it. And again, I'm not going to get into too much more detail because there's a lot on the website. So your head is probably spinning at this point because there's a lot of moving parts to what's going on. But that's the part from now until Election Day. And then the next direct action campaign will happen from Election Day until Inauguration Day. And we will mobilize the moment if, this is a if, I hope it's a if, maybe it won't even come true, but the moment he crosses the line, the moment that we clearly know that he's going for a power grab and intends to try to stay in power, that's when we will mobilize. And we don't yet know what that even looks like. But there are a lot of organizations who are sort of quietly organizing together, planning. So there will be, I mean, we will probably clearly take to the streets and protest initially, but there will be a lot more coming together around the specifics of what we can do together to work on that. And there will be a lot of options for creative, smaller actions that we can do. So I'm going to show you some examples of nonviolent direct action. Now, this is just a screenshot of an article about the Sunrise Movement. They are doing amazing work, and they're the climate justice folks, and it's all young people. And I first saw them, they've been doing this for a number of years, but they're trying to get candidates and politicians to sign a pledge that they will not accept fossil fuel money. And during the primary for the presidential campaign, they would show up at the events and they would approach the candidate and somebody'd have a video running and they would have their clipboard and say, will you sign this pledge? And so they would have them on video saying, oh, yes, of course, or no, I won't. And this article is actually about Beto O'Rourke. Because they were relentless, he eventually signed. But they just show up, and I think in the photograph there, they're at the Capitol, and they just go and they stay as long as it's required. But they've been very successful. They have a whole web page of all the people who have signed. And then there's some fun aspects of nonviolent direct action. I love this photo of LeBron James. Now this is a small piece of something, but what a public statement. It's powerful, it's fun. It's best if it's part of an ongoing campaign, but he's doing a lot of other work in terms of voter registration and stuff. But I just love that these guys wore their Ruth Bader Ginsburg collars. So what should we expect? I believe he's likely to do whatever he can to suppress votes, cheat to steal the election, instigate election day chaos and violence. I don't know if we'll have violence in this area, but I'm sure there will be other states where his minions will show up. He will probably declare himself the winner on election night, no matter what happens. And that's part of what I think we can do now in terms of approaching local media and asking them to not just repeat what he says and to not accept the results until all ballots are counted. He will call it rigged if Biden wins and other unimaginable things. So these are the essential ingredients for preventing a takeover. And mostly it's about mobilizing large numbers of people as quickly as possible. The key thing is for us to mobilize before the coup, the people in power, whoever is going to support him, before they really consolidate their power. And this has been proven historically. Sometimes these things can be shut down in a matter of days if enough people come out and make a statement and do various actions. You saw some of that on the video. Maintaining nonviolence is extremely important. We want to make there be a distinction between if there are militia, secret police that are coming after us, we want there to be a distinction because we have to assume that there's always a video camera on us. And that is why it's essential to stay nonviolent. It'll be obvious who's beating who or whatever. Building alliances, we can start building alliances now, but it's those alliances that we are going to need later on. Attracting a wide range of people. And this is a really interesting piece, and this is also part of the shift, is that the strategy is different because in a situation where you're trying to prevent an authoritarian takeover, we want to attract the people in the political center. We don't want to stay more on the fringes. It's essential. It's always the center, the political center, the people who stay on the sidelines, sometimes for too long. And if they stay on the sidelines, we can't win it. We have to win them over. So we've built our alliances. We're asking just for certain commitments. We're not being on the fringe of what we're doing, and they eventually join in. That's when we create unity and establish solidarity, and that's how we win. And as George Lakey says, the quicker the mobilization, the quicker the resolution. So as many people as possible that we get out and mobilized, the quicker it can be resolved. So what's next? Keep on working on getting out the vote, the work that I know a lot of you are doing. Stretch yourself for your country. If you've only been texting, text banking, it's time to go to phone banking. It's scary, but it's patriotic. And again, learn more about the shift from social change activism to defense activism. Those articles are on the website. Get involved in the Count All Ballots, direct action. And prepare for immediate mobilization. So right now, if anybody wants to be in touch about next steps for the Count All Ballots action, put your email in the chat and we will probably be having some kind of a Zoom meeting, or we'll somehow get in touch with you. No commitment, you can come to a meeting or whatever, find out what it's all about. And if it doesn't work for you, whatever. And in the meantime, you can download the guide for that's on my website. So you can find out what that's all about. But we're flying by the seat of our pants with this in a lot of ways. There's a little bit that's been started, but it's wide open right now. We've got less than 3 weeks to do this, but the more elected officials we can be in touch with and build alliances with the police department and the media, the better off we'll be later on. So that's it for me, and we can now take questions and open up the discussion. A few famous faces here.
We do have some questions. Christine and
Okay.
Karen and Demet are probably putting those together right now.
I got it.
All
Okay.
right.
Ah, there you are. I see everybody now.
So the first question ended up a little discussion in the chat. Nick asks, are protests that block roadways not considered peaceful protests then? And Molly said, I think blocking a roadway is a public safety issue and therefore illegal. And Nick said, I've never agreed with that type of protesting, but I thought that the intent was peaceful unless the protesters engaged with angry drivers. So Christine, we'll let you weigh in on that.
Well, I'm not an expert on that. There's obviously differing opinions, but I think it's better to do things that don't annoy people.
Yeah.
So if we're trying to bring in the political center, if they can't get to work or home, or they can't pick their child up at daycare at the right time, it's like there's plenty of other things we can do, I think, so we can be more creative about that. We can block other things, we don't have to block roadways. So that's just my opinion.
The next question says, that question brings to mind another question, which is, what is the difference between nonviolent resistance and civil disobedience? And Ted R. asked that.
Oh, that's a great question, because I've known about nonviolent direct action for a long time, but it's only recently that I realized I had a very limited view of what it was, and I thought it was mostly civil disobedience, which, if some of you don't know, that's when you purposely chain yourself to a nuclear power plant gate and for the purpose of getting arrested to make a statement and stuff. So there's different levels. In fact, I'm working on making like a spreadsheet chart that sort of explains different ones. I mean, where for LeBron James to wear a RBG collar is a low level, low risk action. But blocking a roadway or other things where there might be violent resistance or you'll get arrested, that's real different. So for civil disobedience, I believe the intention is always to get arrested, and that's the purpose, you're ready to get arrested and stuff. So I think that, there's probably much more to know about it than I know, but that's basically it. So I hope that answers Ted's question.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so Nick asked, and you sort of talked about this, but is the news going to make it worse by declaring a winner of the election on election night, even though all the votes won't be counted?
I'm sorry, say the beginning of that again.
Is the news going to make it worse by declaring a winner before the votes are all counted.
You mean the news media?
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's part of what we can be doing now, is asking them to not do that. In fact, I would love to see the national stations saying to their audience, you know, we're trying not to be political, but this is what we expect. I mean, some are talking a little bit about it, but I would like to see them a little more proactive and say, we expect the president to declare himself the winner. And we want you to know it's unlikely that he will know that on election night, because there will be many mail-in ballots that haven't been counted. So we can certainly talk to now, but that's, you know, that's the big hype. They all want to be the first ones to announce and this and that. So it's going to be hard to get them not to do that, or to get them to not repeat what he said. Oh, the president says he's the winner. And then people hear that as, oh, the president's the winner. But that won't be true. So it will be important. And that might be part of the action that we end up doing on election night in some way, that we will be in the streets. He's not the winner, no matter what he says or whatever that we can do. But that's certainly going to be a big problem.
The next question is the count all ballots effort nationwide? Because it's much more important in swing states than places like Massachusetts.
It is. It has different names. There's Hold the Line. I was just on a training last night. There was a second session of that with the Hold the Line people. They have their own manual. And then because they had a big manual, I decided to make a real simpler version. And then they made a simpler version, but theirs is still rather academic, and mine actually has scripts. I wanted to make it so easy for people and very specific around this pledge. So I give guidelines. Here's what you say. You get on the phone and then you do this, and then different ways you sort of escalate and build it up for people. So.
Okay, and Pam Wool, I think, or Pam Wu, I can't quite
Pam
make
Wool.
that out.
Yeah.
Great. So what about coordinating with groups that are organizing and training people to be poll watchers, to take pictures or something like that of the poll tapes and report irregularities?
That sounds great. Yeah, I think the only thing is to know what the poll watchers can do legally. I know it's illegal in Massachusetts to take a photograph of your ballot if you're there voting. I've seen people do it, but if you're seen doing it, you could potentially get thrown out and have your vote not count. So I would check on that, but that would be something a small team could work on, is finding out the details of that.
All right, the next question, what would you say are the specific next steps we should take to be prepared? For example, get connected with our local police to make them aware of your intent to hold a protest, send outreach to our groups with a plan for a specific time and date. Are those right, and what else? And that's April's question.
Well, the specifics that I spell out in the count the ballot thing, which is basically connecting to specific elected officials, and that can be anywhere from your city councilor to the governor. But obviously it'd be best to sort of coordinate some of these efforts, and Kath and I have been talking about probably very soon, within the next couple of days, maybe having a Zoom meeting to just very quickly say, okay, who knows people in the media and sort of wants to be on that team? Because a lot of this is small teams. It's not like a big, but we want to coordinate it. So we would probably put together some kind of a spreadsheet and have one or two people who would enter the information. And as people took action, they would report to those people. And then we could all see the spreadsheet online, that, oh, so-and-so signed the pledge, so-and-so didn't, these people haven't been contacted yet. So it's going to be chaotic because we have so little time, but as organized as we can get with it. But I think that's, kind of the best thing to do. And then obviously there will be people who will continue doing the candidate work, the phone banking, the text banking and stuff, and then helping their friends get their voting plans together and all that, because getting out the vote is still a number one priority. We can't take anything for granted at this time. So I don't know if I covered everything, but basically that. Familiarize yourself with the count the ballots by looking on the website, and you can check the hold the line document also to see what they're doing. And they're having more trainings too. So if anybody wants to go to their trainings, they can do that. It gets a little more, it gets bigger if you have time to do that.
Okay, Maria Channon asked, will this pledge effort be coordinated and happening relatively soon? Seems like so much voting is happening already. It needs to get amplified really soon.
Yeah, we got to get on this quick. So I've got everything in place if people want to use the guide that I created and the pledge. Like I said, the pledge it's on change.org, and it's a petition basically, but I'm not going to promote it as a general petition. I don't want anybody going there. If they do sign it, it's fine, but I want to save it so that we send it to a particular candidate. We send it to maybe the news media, so that when they sign it, it stands out more, and then we can see that they've signed it. And for some people that we approach, we may, I mean, we're going to have to sort of do this intuitively too. We may not, like if we go meet with the chief of police, he's probably not going to sign the pledge, you know. But we will be establishing a relationship, telling what's going on. We're concerned. We just would love to know if he supports a fair election, and if he supports not prematurely deciding who the winner is. And this is what's great about this campaign, is that it's an easy ask. I mean, this is not partisan, really. It's patriotic. It's like, we want all the ballots counted. We want to know the actual true winner of the election. So the cool thing about it is that if we ask this of someone, it's up to them to then defend why they refuse to sign it or why they refuse to agree with it. And that's what's great about it. We don't have to be fighting with them. It's like we can kind of stay neutral and say, here's what we're asking of you. And then the point is, as you read the guide, the point is to then publicize who signed and who didn't. And that's the pressure. So that's the escalation of pressuring them to decide to sign it. Later down the road, they'll probably decide it's better for their reelection later on if they sign it.
So the your website, Christine, is in the chat again. It's a few messages up. So I would encourage people to copy that and keep that Christine's website handy. She's constantly updating it, and there's so much great information there. And I also want to say again, if you haven't put your email in the chat and you'd like to be part of a small team planning some of these efforts, go ahead and put it in now. We'll contact you within a couple of days. Christine, do you have any closing words?
No, I think that's it. This has been a great call. Really great questions, everybody. And we can do this. It's going to be fun, and we can be really creative. And again, we don't know what thing, there's a thing we can do until election day, and then come election night and after that, hopefully we'll have a better sense from maybe some of the national organizers about, like, this is kind of what we expect, or this is what our plan is, and it could change in a moment's notice. But I just want to encourage people to, particularly those of you who know that you can take to the streets, prepare yourself, get snacks and backpacks and face shields and whatever you need. Some of us will probably be taken to the streets locally, but others may decide to go to DC. There's organizations that are already planning a lot of stuff around that. So whatever we can do. I mean, anything could happen. We might have power outages, again, in Massachusetts, I don't know that anything as drastic will happen, but there will certainly be states where weird shit's gonna happen. There's, there could be power outages, there could be violence, there could be anything. So we can be thinking about how we can support people in other states. I mean, New Hampshire is just a stone's throw away. They might be coming here. They always come down for our elections anyway. I see New Hampshire license plates at the polls all the time supporting the Republican candidates. So we don't know what's going to happen, but be prepared for anything. Again, keep going back to my website because I change it, update. I will be having updates. Here's a new training. Here's a new this is what we're doing now. It will all be there. And then we may have some other places where we have centralized information also. But I love that all these different groups came together tonight, and all the thank you to the different sponsors for this.
And that's what does make it work. As you said, Christine, we can do this, and we can do this when we do it together. We need all of us to take action. So thank you everyone for coming tonight, and keep watch wherever you found the information about the meeting tonight. Keep watch, and there'll probably be more information coming up. So thank you again, and thank you, Christine, especially.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you, Christine.
Thank you. It was an
Thank you
honor.
to Kath for bringing us all together. Thanks
Okay.
so much. It was
Awesome.
a really valuable discussion.
More to come. This is only the beginning, people.
Yeah, so true.